I'm Rachel Ann Goodman. Welcome to Talk of the Bay on KSQD Santa Cruz. I'm here with Shannon Olivieri Hovis. She is the director of the NARAL pro-choice organization for all of California. They are a national organization, but they have local chapters in all states, I believe. Welcome to the program, Shannon. Thanks for being here with us.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Great to have you. So I heard a story on NPR a couple of weeks ago that talked about efforts to ban the abortion pill, which is now seen as kind of the last available option for people in many states that have banned abortion completely. Can you take us through the lawsuit that's sparked this case and what the timeline might be on finding out and what appeals, kind of lay out the legal landscape? From what I could gather from that story, this could take away the right for everyone in the country to use these pills if it's successful. So maybe that was overreaction on the part of the people talking on that story, but I don't know. That's why I'm having you on the show. It seems pretty drastic of an effect that could happen pretty quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think as a bit of background here, it's important for folks to know that it was just days after voters made their support for abortion clear in November's midterm elections that anti-choice organizations filed this unfounded federal lawsuit, which seeks to revoke the FDA's approval of mifepristone. And mifepristone is one of two medications that is typically used in a medication abortion. Now, this is despite the fact that mifepristone has been FDA approved for more than 20 years. It has an extraordinarily strong safety record and effectiveness record, and is in fact safer than Tylenol. And yet, they're attacking this, of course, because they are trying to put abortion care out of reach. And really, the impetus here, the purpose here, from their perspective, is to try to eliminate access to medication abortion everywhere. We know that in states that have already banned abortion, medication abortion is similarly hard to come by. Of course, you can still buy pills online. You can find them other ways. But nonetheless, if abortion is banned in your state, medication abortion as well as procedural abortion is banned in a state like California, this would be a federal lawsuit. And so even here, if this judge who is anti-choice, and they went to him intentionally, we can get into that. But if this judge rules in their favor and forces the FDA to revoke its approval of mifepristone, it could put mifepristone out of reach in all states across the country, including California. So that it's not alarmist to say that this really could create a backdoor national abortion ban as it relates to medication abortion.
And from what I understand, even if it's being appealed, if this lawsuit is successful on the part of the anti-choice people, it means it could come off the shelves from pharmacies while it's being appealed, meaning almost immediately. Is that your understanding?
Yeah, so it would pull it off the market, is what you're getting at. It would make it so that mifepristone is inaccessible across the market. And I want to be clear that there are a variety of different scenarios. And, I'm not a litigator. And obviously, we're not a part of the litigation team. We're a national advocacy organization and really fighting for equitable and accessible abortion care for all people. With that said, I mean, there are a variety of different scenarios that could come out of this case. And one of them, of course, is what we're getting at, which is mifepristone being entirely out of reach all across the country.
And so, what is the argument on the case side of the people who are bringing this case? What kind of case are they making to pull this off the market in the first place?
I mean, their arguments, honestly, are so baseless. It is absurd. They have no standing. They cannot prove harm. The argument is that the FDA didn't undergo essentially the process, the thorough extent of the process that they needed to go through in order to prove that this drug is safe and effective. Well, We have 23 years now. This was FDA approved in the year 2000. We have 23 years of records with over 100 studies showing just how effective medication abortion is. And like I said at the outset, we're talking about a medication that is safer than Tylenol.
We should add this is happening in Texas. Is that correct?
It is happening in Texas. That's right. So the safety record on mifepristone is over 99%. These attacks just simply are not based in science whatsoever. And there is no real basis for their argument. They are simply trying another strategy, throwing whatever they can at the wall, seeing what sticks here to try to unravel the right to abortion all across this country.
And we might want to add that, sorry to interrupt you, we might want to note that judges are also not scientists or medical professionals. So they're being asked to make a decision to second guess the FDA, a federal agency. So where did we end up with a situation where a state judge in the state of Texas is able to rule on the efficacy or safety of something that the federal government agency spent years vetting? I don't know how many years it takes to bring a drug to market, but I think it's like 15. So where does a judge weigh in or get to weigh in on the safety of a medicine? I mean, when does this end? What other medicines are they going to start challenging next? It's very strange to have someone with literally no background in pharmacology being put in a position to rule on the safety of a drug.
Right. Well, and this is an incredibly important point, because if the judge were to rule in favor of the anti-choice organizations that have filed in this case and force the FDA to revoke their approval and withdraw mifepristone from the market, this would set precedent. A court has never ever done this with a medication, forcing the FDA to withdraw its approval. And the precedent that you're getting at is, of course, this is a horribly alarming precedent. The FDA is a scientific, non-political entity, and they are making their determinations based on medical science and research. To have this kind of activist, judge intervene with such dire consequences to health and well-being, to your point, I mean, what else could they, people could then try to use this and put forth bogus cases toward the FDA to have them be forced to pull approval for any variety of medication that's been approved for God knows how long, right? So I really do think that it's an important point. And to the harm of, if this case goes through where mifepristone is in fact out of reach for all Americans, currently medication abortion is used to provide more than half of all abortion care in the country. So this would put the most commonly used method of care, this does put, frankly, the most commonly used method of abortion care at risk of being eliminated nationwide, right?
Well, we're going to talk in a moment about the other medication abortion pill that is not being challenged in just a moment, and also its implications for women's health in just a moment. But I want to stay with this idea that as we're speaking, and this is getting some publicity, I can hear people stockpiling these pills, both for the black market and also just because they care about women's health. Have you heard of any cases of just massive runs on these medications, given the potential that they could be out of reach for millions of women?
Certainly the overall guidance that we're hearing from medical providers is asking folks not to stockpile these medications. There is a shelf life, of course, and it's more extensive for mifepristone. I think it's 4 years, but nonetheless, we have not been encouraged to ask folks to do that. With that said, I mean, you can see why there would be the impetus and the impulse of folks to want to do that, right? Now, one of the things I want to make super clear is that while it is true, I mentioned at the outset, right, that medication abortion, what that consists of is two different medications. So it's a combination, is what we use, of mifepristone as one of the drugs. The other is called misoprostol. And it is, while that is the most effective combination to induce miscarriage, to have a medication abortion, it is also the case that misoprostol can be used on its own. And so states like California are looking to figure out, regardless of the outcome in this case, how do we ensure that medication abortion continues to be available? And that there is not a lapse in the, ability to access that treatment in this state and that healthcare in this state. So we are looking at making sure that a misoprostol only protocol essentially would be available to anybody who needs to access care here. So, like I said, California is doing, as we always do, everything in our power to guarantee that regardless of the outcome in this case, medication abortion remains available, even if it is misoprostol only, which is not ideal. It
It's
is
not
not as
as
effective.
effective. I was
It's
just
not
going to
as
say that.
effective.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. It's not as effective as mifepristone, the combination of mifepristone and misoprostol, which speaks again to the irony of this case, which is that they're trying to say, the bogus grounds for this lawsuit in the first place around, as if there were a questionable record of safety or effectiveness of mifepristone, when in fact we know that the most effective combination for medication abortion is mifepristone together with misoprostol.
If you just joined me, I'm speaking with Shannon Olivieri Hovis, and she is a director of California NARAL pro-choice organization, advocacy organization, educating and advocating for women's access to abortion services. And we're speaking about a lawsuit that's taking place in Texas. And I believe it's like right, in the next couple of weeks, we should hear about a ruling that could outlaw the access to medication abortion, at least from this one pill, to the entire country. So, in effect, creating an abortion ban for the United States. I want to go back to the health impacts on women. And I have to say that it's positively Orwellian to hear male, older white male lawyers in this case argue that the reason they're bringing this lawsuit is because they have concern for women's health, that somehow medicated abortion was rushed through the FDA 21 years ago, and that's why they're doing this. They should just be honest about the reasons they're doing this instead of lying to the public about concern over women's health. It's certainly not about women's health at all. And that's my personal take on the strange narrative that these people have taken in trying to advance this lawsuit.
Right. I think that's really important to emphasize. We know that they are unable to pass a nationwide abortion ban because most Americans would reject that. And that's why the outcome of this election the midterm election was so strong, right? We saw abortion was on the ballot everywhere. We gained ground in the US Senate. That's remarkable in the midterm following, in a midterm where the power in the presidency does terribly usually in the midterm cycle. And so, we had 6, I think, just to speak to the popularity of abortion access, right? There were 6 referendums last year, 3 of them that were protecting and expanding access to abortion care within state constitutions, and 3 that were trying to limit care, restrict access to care, some of which even stated there is no constitutional protection in this state as it relates to abortion access and reproductive freedom. Well, the side of support for reproductive freedom and access to abortion care was successful and victorious in each of those 6 referendums. The 3 that were aimed at being restrictive failed. The 3 that were aimed at being protective and expansive passed. And this is consistent with what we know about support for access to abortion care, that 8 in 10 Americans support the legal right to abortion, and did not want to see Roe v. Wade overturned. We know that there is not a single state in the country where banning abortion is popular. And so in a world where they are in fact unable to pass a nationwide abortion ban, the anti-choice minority in this country is now pushing for this kind of backdoor ban on abortion through the courts. And, they have taken it to Texas. They've taken it to this judge in particular, who has, a storied record. He's Trump appointed, storied record of being anti-LGBTQ, anti-choice, anti-immigrant, and in hopes that he is going to be this activist judge who, in fact, puts medication abortion out of reach for Americans in the country.
And when will that ruling? I think I mentioned it was expected in February, but here we are, edging toward the second half of the month. Is anybody watching when this ruling might come down?
Yeah, so we could expect it as soon as February 24th.
Wow, that's really soon. That's less than a week away.
And we would expect that the FDA, if the outcome of this case goes against the FDA, that they would appeal the ruling, and then it would go to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, and it could end up before the Supreme Court. It could end up before the Supreme Court in a matter of months.
Right, and we know how they felt about Roe v. Wade, so we'll see if this is any different at all. We'll just have to wait. But that is what observers are saying, is that it could go to the Supreme Court, which is not necessarily a good thing. Let's go back to the health impacts. This pill, mifepristone, if I said it right, works early in the process. It's different, just so people know, from the morning after pill, right? And how does it work, just so people can understand what would be lost if it went away?
Yeah, it's a really important distinction. So mifepristone, like I said, is one of 2 medications that is typically used in a medication abortion. It is, so mifepristone and misoprostol, they can be used, medication abortion procedures typically happen up to about 11 weeks of pregnancy. And that's when it can safely be used, and it induces an abortion, it induces miscarriage, and really presents exactly the same as a miscarriage, spontaneous or induced. In fact, when people are being treated for miscarriage management, for having undergone an incomplete miscarriage, they are similarly treated with using these same medications, mifepristone being one of them. It is critical to ensure that people can actually miscarry safely.
And what proportion of births end in miscarriage? Do you have that stat? I know that I just threw that at you, but I have a friend who almost died from a miscarriage that wouldn't complete, so to speak. And if they had been living in Texas right now, they would be dead. And that's just a fact, because the time it would have taken for some judge or lawyer to weigh in, it would have been too late. Thankfully, that person was able to be seen, but this was a while before this ban got passed in Texas.
Right. So, your question, I'm sorry, tell me your question again.
The question is, how many people who have miscarriage,
That's right.
What's the rate of miscarriage in this country? It's pretty high, right? Like the number of people
It's very, very high. So it's estimated that about 1 in 5 pregnancies end in miscarriage. But that's actually, it's actually estimated to be a bit of an undercount, because those are known pregnancies, lots of known pregnancies. And generally, you don't have at least a confirmed pregnancy with your medical provider until your 8th or 9th week, when you go in for your first prenatal appointment. So a lot of pregnancies will end in miscarriage before people even know they're pregnant, at the 4th week, the 5th week, even the 6th week. and they may not have a confirmed pregnancy yet. It may just present as a really heavy period. I'm speaking to this as somebody I'm currently 27 weeks pregnant, and
Congratulations.
thank you so much. And one of the things that you're so mindful of when you do find out that you're pregnant is, for the first few weeks there, you're just kind of biding your time because miscarriage is so, so common. I've experienced one myself very early on. I had just found out I was pregnant and I miscarried. Um, and and again, it's so incredibly common. So that figure even, I think, is an underrepresentation, but it does speak to, medication, a spontaneous abortion, which is a miscarriage, right? As opposed to an induced abortion, induced miscarriage. These present in exactly the same fashion, and they require the same medication to be treated. And so, to the health implications here, not only are you making abortion less effective, right? If we do go with misoprostol only, which is a good option, but it's still less effective than the combination of mifepristone and misoprostol. So they're actually putting people at greater risk through that. And then mifepristone is a life-saving intervention for pregnant people if they are experiencing miscarriage and need that miscarriage management.
I was
So
going to
there,
say the reason my friend almost died was, she didn't get there quick enough and she had lost so much blood. She was really on the edge of passing away. And a lot of people don't know they need to get care right away. And so I would imagine the number of deaths from miscarriages are quite high compared with other things people go through, right? So that's another danger of removing this option from what you said is that people who need immediate care may not get it, who might
I
be in
think it
danger of
speaks
dying.
I think it speaks to what we are seeing overall with bans on abortion nationally, which is that the risk to the health and well-being of pregnant people are so, so extraordinary. This is really, these abortion bans are associated already with worse maternal health outcomes. And it should be no shock to folks that the same states that are passing bans on abortion have among the highest maternal mortality rates in the country, right? So all that we are doing when we ban abortion, when we put abortion out of reach for people, is making it much, much less safe to be a pregnant person in these states. And that's what the consequence of a ruling here that put mifepristone out of reach, the consequence would be, again, we are putting people at risk. We are making it less safe to be pregnant in this country.
It's a really sad state of affairs, and we're going backwards when we were gaining in all these directions for a while there. I want to talk about doctors and people who run pharmacies because they would be the ones liable, and they would end up being fined or go to jail if they do provide these. So, what are you hearing from doctors about this, and also pharmacy owners?
Well, I would say mostly what we're hearing from doctors is we will continue to do everything in our power to provide medication abortion, even if it's misoprostol only. That is like the biggest thing that we are hearing from folks. They are going to continue to do their job and to do everything they can to serve their patients to the best of their ability. And that means making sure that people can get the best health care that they can provide. The other thing that we're hearing certainly is, right, this is not, even if this one judge in this instance is able to put mifepristone out of reach for a period of time, this is not the end of the story. Of course, the FDA can go back and issue a new approval of mifepristone. That would take some time. It could be off the shelves, it could be off the market for a period of time. But I don't want people to think that, mifepristone could go away and be gone forever. And this, what is the ideal medication abortion, could be out of reach permanently. That is not going to be the state of affairs that we are in, certainly not with all of the advocacy that all of these organizations are doing. But again, with the fact that the FDA is a scientific research-based entity, and they are trying their best to preserve that. That's why they're fighting this case, and obviously do not want to see mifepristone, their approval of it withdrawn. The other thing we're seeing is pharmaceutical companies are very much up in arms about this for a variety of reasons, including the precedent that we talked about earlier and how dangerous that is as far as, any medication, any drug that has been approved by the FDA could be at risk for, this sort of activist court trying to come in and force them to withdraw approval. So I think that there's going to continue to be momentum, and I want to draw momentum. I mean, to make sure that there is no permanency to the harm that this will undoubtedly temporarily create if this judge rules with the anti-choice organizations. I don't want to understate the chaos that it will continue to create, which is sort of a permanent state of chaos that we're living in.
Yeah,
Now
it
that
feels
Roe has
like it.
fallen.
It feels like everything's back to the states, and every state's going to have some sort of different set of rules for the women there. So we are not treating everyone living in the United States equally when it comes to access to healthcare. We probably haven't been for a while, but this just has made it even more obvious that people who have less means to travel, and in this case, I suppose people can order these on the black market over the internet and get them from other countries if this ban goes into effect. Have you heard about those plans in case this goes through?
Sure. I think it's a really important point, right? We have the advent of the internet at this point. Even in states, 17 states currently are enforcing bans on abortion. And still, people in those states are going online. They are finding medication abortion ways to order medication abortion online and have it delivered to the safety of their homes. Now, obviously, in the fraught legal landscape that we live in, with many of these states where abortion is being criminalized, where pregnant people are being criminalized for accessing abortion care, they have to proceed in doing that with some measure of caution. But that will always be a solution. Like I said, these medications are so safe that it is very possible, and people have been managing their own abortions and miscarriages for forever
At
since.
least for 21 years, as long as this medication has been available. We have just
And
a
even
few.
before that, think about the for as long as there have been human beings, women and people who can become pregnant have endeavored to control and manage their fertility to some extent. And there have been, for literally thousands of years, there have been a variety of different ways in which people have endeavored to do that. And, so I do think that it's an important point about, we'll continue to see people do what they can to get the healthcare that they need, whether they can do that through, official systems or whether they have to do that on their own.
Yeah. And the whole medical privacy that you kind of raised, but I'd like to raise as a final point before we have to go, which is there's a lot of young women who are not tracking their periods anymore on apps because now they're afraid that someone will be surveilling, them if they stop having one, and then check up on them and see what they did about it. So there's a fear a lot of people in reproductive age have that their medical privacy is going to be invaded by these ever more draconian laws. And I just wondered if you could say any encouraging words for us as we close. What is, NARAL California working on, and how do people get involved?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think importantly for California, what folks should know, NARAL is a founding member and on the steering committee for the California Future of Abortion Council. And this is a group that we convened over a year ago when the Supreme Court allowed Roe to fall in Texas. Before they ruled in the Dobbs case last June, they let Texas instate a 6-week abortion ban. And so we created that council. We've been running huge packages of legislation to continue to shore up our legal landscape here in California, our infrastructure to provide abortion care to anybody who needs it, shore up our provider shortages. And we've done tremendous work so far. Part of that package was to pass Proposition 1 last year and enshrine the right to abortion and contraception in our state constitution. And that work continues. We're running a large bill package this year in the state legislature to continue to ensure that we are protecting and expanding access to abortion care to the greatest extent possible in the state of California for anyone who needs to access it, regardless of where, what state they call home. And that includes, to your point, Rachel, about privacy protections, that includes doing everything that we can to protect people's health information, but as well as, information that may be related to their Google searches or, their period tracking apps or anything else, their Lyft rides or things like that. And so these are all considerations. I think to your point about what's hopeful, this kind of work that I'm talking about that California is doing, that work is being done in states like ours all across the country, in Illinois and New York and Washington. We are not going at this alone. And I want to again go back to the outcome of the midterm election, because what we saw is that there is overwhelming support among the American people for access to abortion, legal abortion, and the fundamental freedom of reproductive freedom. And so I do think that there is something really heartening in where public opinion is on this matter. As I said before, 8 in 10 Americans support the legal right to abortion. We've seen that play out in elections in places like Michigan and Pennsylvania, where abortion was really on the ballot with who was elected and also with ballot initiatives. And that's the work that we'll continue to do at NARAL, going state by state, ban by ban, as we need to continue to instate protections and expand protections where we already have them.
Well, thank you. That's a great place to end. And I appreciate your time today on Talk of the Bay. Shannon Olivieri Hovis, Director of California NARAL Pro-Choice. Thanks for being here on Talk of the Bay. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.